Hello and welcome to my channel. This is going to be my last video of Bookmas. We're going to end this off by doing all of the books that I have read in 2023. I read 81 books this year. I'm gonna try to go through it pretty quickly. Let's get into it. The first book that I read this year was Daisy Jones and the Six, and I loved Daisy Jones and the Six. This is my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book. It's probably one of the books I've read this year that has made me feel the most. It is jam-packed with like really beautiful quotes that I love so much. This is one of those books that I would just recommend to everyone. Next, I read Curse of the Wolf King. This was just a really lighthearted fairy tale romance and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. It was just like a nice fluffy fantasy. It was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Next, I read The Dead Romantics and this ended up being one of my favorite books of the year. I loved it so much. It's so good. It's a romance with a little bit of a paranormal vibe, but it's very like happy and good vibes. It's not like scary paranormal. Really beautiful and poetic and amazing. Next, I read Furyborn and I loved this book so much. It's a YA fantasy. This was one of the more unique fantasy books that I've read and I just thought that it was a really cool story, and the romance in this I loved so much. I did read the second one of this too this year, and that one was really good as well. Next, I read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. I didn't really like this one very much. I thought that it was a really witty writing, which was cool, and I enjoyed some of the writing, but the story itself, I wasn't really interested in it. Maybe eventually I'll read one of the other Bridgerton books. Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute. This is a YA romance. This has a lot of like really sweet and cute moments in it, and the characters in it are super endearing. It talks about mental health. There were a lot of like little really enjoyable bits, but it was just the segments in between those really enjoyable bits where I felt like I was getting a little bit bored. Looking back at all the YA romances I've read, I would say this isn't one of my favorites, but it's still like good. I'd still recommend it to someone. It's just not as good as some of the other ones that I've read. It is very cute though. I read Bloodmarked, and this is the sequel, or I think there's gonna be another one after this too. Legendborn was first, and then this is the second one, and I did really like this one. I liked it even more than the first one. It's a really cool YA fantasy book that I would recommend. I really liked the found family in this one. I feel like it's going in a direction that I'm just like really excited about. Say You Swear. This is a college sports romance. It's an adult romance. I overall enjoyed this, but at the same time there were a lot of bits that I didn't really like about it. I think with this one it really comes down to it just not being my ideal genre. I'm not that much of a sports romance person, and I'm even more not really like a college sports romance person, but that being said, like maybe I'll read a book one day and it will convince me otherwise, you know? I mean, I'm open to it. It's hard because I feel like this one is really enjoyable and I'd recommend it to someone if they like the genre a lot, but for me specifically I felt like it just wasn't that worth it. Before We Were Strangers, I wanted to like this book so bad, and I did. Okay, I thought it was a good book. Like when I was rating it and stuff, I was like, okay, this is a good book. The only reason I don't like it that much is because I'm not happy with what happened in it. I think I wanted a more happy romance ending. Like it was a happy ending, but it was like, it was bittersweet, and I feel like I just wanted it to be sweet, but it was bittersweet. So that's just like a me thing. I feel like it wasn't what I was expecting, and I think that made me like it less. Also, it's a second chance romance that takes place partly in college. I read Namesake. This is the second book to the Fable duology. It was good, but I felt like it was pretty average. It didn't really do much for me, but you know, it was good. It just wasn't that memorable. Like I barely remember what happened in it. Next, I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I'll just talk about all the three books in the same one. I read all three of these books this year and they were so amazing. These were some of my best reads of the year and I just had such a good time reading them. It's a YA murder mystery about a girl who starts a podcast to investigate a murder that happened in her high school years ago, and it is so good. I would recommend this to everyone. I read A Fate of Wrath and Flame, and then I liked it so much that I read the second one after. I don't have the physical copy of the second one, but the second one is A Curse of Blood and Stone. It's so weird because I can't say I remember that much about these books, but I know that I really enjoyed reading them. So it's like they must have been really good. Like I think they were, like I remember them being really good. It was a good time. It was enemies to lovers and I enjoyed it. I read Icebreaker. I actually ended up DNFing it. I know that a lot of people love Icebreaker, but it just was not my thing. I wasn't invested in the story or the characters. It just, yeah, it didn't speak to me. I got a little nostalgic and I reread this book that I read when I was younger. It's called Reign of Shadows, and I remember loving it and thinking it was so good when I was younger, and then it's one of those things where like reading it again now I like don't think it's nearly as good as I thought it was, so I kind of ruined it for my, like ruined the memory of it, but hey, at least like now I know. I read Violet Made of Thorns, and I was really hoping I'd like this one because I was trying to get a book that I didn't really hear that much about, and so this is a YA fantasy book and it's enemies to lovers. I just found it a little bit boring. Some parts were interesting in it, but overall I wouldn't recommend it. I didn't really like it that much. I read Winter in Paradise. This is a mystery fiction book with some romance in it too. It has a couple of different POVs. I thought it was a good, solid book. I read The Final Gambit, and okay, you know what's so weird about this series is that I really like this series. It's one that I'd recommend. I especially really loved the first one. I should probably reread them at some point. I just think they're really fast-paced, interesting, have a bit of mystery, a love triangle. It's just so weird because I can't remember like anything that happened in this book. Like, I remember small things. I don't even remember who the main character ended up with. Like, there was a love triangle and it was really prominent in the books, and I don't even remember which one. I feel like I know which one, but then I'm like, how did that even happen? Like, I don't even remember it happening. It's always so weird when I read an entire book and then I like forget a bunch of what happened in it. I'm like, I spent so many hours reading that and now I just like don't know what happened. Next I've got By the Book. By the Book was a solid romance for me. It was definitely like an average one. Like, I'd recommend it to someone if they're looking for something like this, but it's not one of my favorites. It's like in the middle for me. This Vicious Grace, it's kind of a similar thing. Like, it's like an average fantasy book for me. I feel like I've read ones that are just like a lot better than this, but it is like a bodyguard romance, which is fun. I read Sky Hunter. I liked it enough to read the second one. I don't have the physical copy of that, but it's Steel Striker. They were kind of in the same realm of this Vicious Grace. I would still recommend it to someone who likes this type of thing, but it's just like not a book that left a very big mark on me. Like, it was kind of just like another fantasy book that I read, you know? At the time, I feel like I liked it a lot more than I do looking back at it. Next we have The Stolen Heir, and this one, I just love the world so much. It feels like the Holly Black like Fae world books feel so refreshing to me. Like, something about them is just so new and exciting, even though like I've read the Cruel Prince series and it's the same world as this one. It just feels like coming back to something that's so cool. The romance in the beginning, I didn't know if it was going to be as good as it ended up being, but it was amazing at the end. Like, it ended up being one of my favorite books of the year. Can't wait for the next one to come out. I can just like vividly remember myself reading this one. I'm just gonna talk about all the Percy Jackson books that I read at once because I read the Percy Jackson The Olympian series and I really liked it. I thought it was really good. I loved listening to them as an audiobook. They're so enjoyable to just have on like while you're doing something. It's like hanging out with friends. That's how I would describe reading this series. It feels relaxing and comforting and it brought me a lot of joy. Next I read Truly Devious. It's a YA murder mystery and I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I'm wondering if the next books get better because I might read them. I'm like on the fence. I really am interested in the romance though. I read Culty by Marina Zapata, and honestly like I really don't remember this book at all. It feels like I didn't even read it, but I know I read it. I feel like I had higher expectations for this one than it was, and then I ended up not liking it that much. I read Maid in Manhattan. This one was so cute and such a fun time to read. I would definitely recommend this to someone. I listened to it as an audiobook and I had a good time. I was on an audiobook kick because I also listened to Fourth Wing as an audiobook. Actually, I did that because I couldn't find this book anywhere. It was so hard to get in the beginning of when it was getting really big. I remember I ordered it and then it like didn't come until way later, but I really ended up liking it, so it's a good thing that now I have the book. I might have to reread parts of it before I read the next book just to like refresh my brain, because I don't know if it was because I listened to it as an audiobook, but some parts of it I'm forgetting a little bit. Like, I'll see people talking about it and then I'll be like, wait, I kind of forgot that happened. Like, I forget who that character is, and I'm excited to read the next one. Daughter of the Pirate King. I did not like this one very much, which I actually read a book recently by this author that I absolutely loved. I'm going to talk about it later. This one fell flat for me. I was not that entertained. I read Happy Place by Emily Henry and I really liked this one. This one was Friends to Lovers. It felt more like I was reading a fiction book than romance at some parts, but it really had a lot of romance too, especially towards later on in the book. A little bit harder to get into than some of her other books, but I loved it so much by the end of it that I'm just happy that I stuck through and like got into it because it was very worth it. So many beautiful quotes in Emily Henry books. I read Take a Hint, Dani Brown. I do not have a physical copy of this one, but I really enjoyed this one. This one was a really good one. I feel like I'd put it up there with Maid in Manhattan. It's the same sort of thing where it's like I'd recommend it to someone. It was really cute. It was so cozy and comforting to read. Something about it just made me feel like warm and fuzzy. Yours Truly, I really like this one. I felt like this was one of the really good ones that I read this year. It's not one of my favorite romance books, but it's still like really good. It's enemies to lovers for like a split second, and then it's not, and then it's like fake dating. I thought it was really cute and it was funny. I read Malibu Rising, and this became one of my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid books. I think that this one specifically is like one of the most just flat out entertaining ones that I would recommend to probably more people because I feel like it's easier, especially maybe if someone doesn't read. I feel like this one would be the easiest or one of the easier ones to get into. There's always something happening. I really like how it's connected to like Daisy Jones and the Six and the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I just love seeing all the characters in the different worlds colliding. It was interesting to see this different perspective of McReva. I really liked the family dynamic and I just had a lot of fun reading this. I read Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan and I didn't really like it that much. I honestly don't remember that much about it, but I remember thinking that it was okay, but it just wasn't one that I'd recommend to someone. I just didn't really have that great of a time reading it. I read Twisted Love and I didn't really like it that much. I liked some parts of it, but overall, I think I actually ended up not quite finishing it. I think at some point I DNF'd it. I'm interested in seeing what the other books in the series are like, but I'm a little bit scared now because I didn't really like that one. I read Sorcery of Thorns. It's a YA fantasy, and I did not like that one very much. I wasn't really invested in the story, and I was kind of bored. Next, I read A River Enchanted, and I really love that one. That's by the same author as Divine Rivals, and it is so good. The writing is lyrical and poetic, magical, and then there's a romance at the core. I also read the second book of Fire Endless, and I also really like that one. I read The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams, and I didn't really like it that much. I remember what it was about and like baseline what it's about, but I just remember not liking it. I read What Happened to Ruthie Ramirez. I listened to the audiobook though. I was really interested in like certain parts of this. It's pretty sad. It's a pretty sad and interestingly written book. I didn't love it. Like, I don't think I would recommend it to someone. Now switching it over to Farah from yesterday, who's going to do the second part of this, What Happens After Midnight. I thought this one was really fun and so cute. I love this one, and it was one of those books where I just had an amazing time reading it, and those are some of my favorite types of books to read ever. I think this one was honestly like a 4 stars, maybe even 4.5. Next, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Let's see what I reviewed it on Goodreads, because when I reviewed it on Goodreads, it was like fresh in my mind, and I feel like I was like really frustrated with it. I rated it a 3. I literally wrote like a angry review about him, about President Snow. Like, I absolutely dragged him in this review. I was so upset. I liked the writing. I thought it was a good book, but like it was just too frustrating. I read The Lost Hero, The Heroes of Olympus 1. I got into a huge Percy Jackson kick this year. I liked the first series so much that I went on to this next series, and I also really like this one. I don't think I like it as much. I'm like in the middle of it right now, but I still like it. It's just like, you know, Percy Jackson is my favorite to follow so far out of like these books. Next, we have a series that I'm just gonna talk about all of them at the same time because I read 3 of them so far. I read The Naturals, and then I read the second book, Killer Instinct, and the third book, All In. I'm trying to figure out which one was my favorite, and I actually don't know because I just love them all so much. I gave all of these 5 stars, and I 100% feel like they deserved it. I read this one like a while ago, still 5 stars easily. To me, they're not super predictable, and they're so interesting and entertaining and amazing. I read Lease on Love. I didn't really like that one very much. I actually ended up DNFing it. It wasn't even like that bad of a book. I was going through a reading slump, and I was just bored reading it, and it wasn't catching my attention. Carrie Soto is back. I feel like I haven't read a book by her that I just didn't at all like. This one has a MC that is not always like easy MC to root for because she's kind of rude sometimes, but I feel like getting to know her more in this book, I just sort of got to understand her a little bit better, which I really enjoyed. I think I would give this book, okay, it's hard because I feel like I rated it higher right after I read it, but now I feel like I'd give it like a 3.8 or something like that. I read The 100,000 Kingdoms. This was a crazy book. So many crazy things were happening that I was like, what is happening? Like, half of me reading it, I was like, wait, what is happening? It's a adult fantasy. I really want to try the 5th season by this author. I liked some parts of it, but I just didn't like the book in total of what it is. Like, I wasn't like, this is like a really good book. It was interesting though, so I really want to read the 5th season by this author. I heard that one's really good, and I kind of wish I started with that one. I'm not going to continue the series though. I read The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. I listened to it as an audiobook, and that may be part of why I feel this way, but I feel like I just don't really even remember that much of it. Like, I remember it, but like it's not memorable, if you know what I mean. It was just like such an average book in the memory of all the books I read, and I wouldn't like recommend it to myself again. I'd read a different book instead if I could be given the choice. That's kind of how I feel like I'd recommend books to people, is like, would I recommend this to myself again if I hadn't read it yet? And that one I wouldn't, even though a lot of people probably like it. Divine Rivals. It's a YA fantasy, rivals to lovers, one of my favorite tropes. I definitely can see me really loving the series. I kind of want to reread the first one or parts of the first one. The writing, if I'm remembering correctly, the writing is like a little bit more lyrical. I did really enjoy the romance. I do wish that I read it instead of listening to it as an audiobook. It's one of those books where like I think it's better if you read it. The Right Move, this is a adult sports romance. I thought this one, like, I don't love sports romances that much. I've loved some, but like this one I thought it was good and I enjoyed it and I would recommend it as a sports romance. It wasn't like, over all the romances that I've read overall, it wasn't one that is like one of my favorites or anything, but I still think it was like good. The guy in this ended up being really sweet, and the girl in it was always really sweet, and they were really good together, so I enjoyed it. I think it was a bit too long though. At the end I was kind of bored because they were just happy and fine for so long, and I was like, I don't really care about that. I kind of just want like getting to them being together and then maybe a little bit of them together, but like not that much. The 7-Year Slip, I loved this one so much. I thought it was amazing. One of my favorite books of this year. I feel like it's the genre of romance that's like, if you like Emily Henry, then I think you might like this book too. Like, it has those vibes to it. Hello Stranger by Catherine Center, same sort of thing that I was saying about like kind of the Emily Henry vibe, but this one, in the beginning, it just felt like it was more just fiction, and then it had more romance as you went through it. I feel like it could have had a bit more romance in it, and I would have liked it more, but the fact that it was just like a good fiction story anyway, I did enjoy reading about her stuff. I just like, I was going into it thinking it was a romance, so I kind of wish that it had more romance in it. Overall, I really enjoyed this one. Magnolia Parks, I was just so frustrated with these characters, but did I enjoy it? Was I entertained? Yes. Did I feel like I just didn't want to stop reading? Yes. Did I think about it for a long time after I finished it? Yes. Did I become attached to the characters? Kind of. Am I happy that I read it? Yes. Can I say that I like really like the characters that much? Not completely. Am I rooting for the two main characters to be together? I don't know. Would I say that I just liked it overall? I don't know. I just don't know. I don't even know. It's an experience, and that's all I'll say. The Lost Apothecary, this is a like woman's historical fiction. I thought that it was kind of boring. I don't know if it's just because I don't like read the genre that much, it's not really my thing, or if it's just because it was kind of boring, but I feel like there just wasn't that much happening. It felt very long for me, even though it's not a very long book. Funny Feelings, I liked that one, but I don't think I'd read it again if I could recommend myself a book again. I don't think I'd read it again because it just didn't really stand out to me at all. I really liked like certain little parts of it, but it felt like one of those books where I was just like reading just to like read, and I felt myself reading it. That also might be because I listened to the audiobook a little bit, but I've listened to audiobooks that I really love, so I wouldn't say it's completely that. I didn't love it, but I definitely enjoyed some parts of it. Night of the Witch, I didn't really like this book that much. There were some parts of it that I thought were really interesting, but overall I just was not invested in the characters. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. Finally read this one, and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. It was just like a good time, enemies to lovers, and yeah, this one was one of my favorites of the year. I loved it so much. Love Theoretically by Ellie Hazelwood. It was just like such a, she's gonna say it again, it was such a good time. I just loved it. Enemies to lovers, it's just so good. It's so good. It's one of those fluffy, feel-good types of romances. I would definitely recommend this one to myself again. House of Hollows, this book was so creepy, but it wasn't bad. I don't like horror books, but I read this because my mom picked it out for me to read. It was a good book. I especially liked it more like towards the end. In the beginning, it took me a little bit to get into. I would say just read it if you like horror books. The Serpent and the Wings of Night, I'm happy I read this one. Like, it was really good. It was a vampire enemies to lovers romance. It's like pretty intense in a good way, dramatic. I really liked it. I like vampire romances, so this was just a good time. Also, didn't see the twist at the end coming, and that is always a nice surprise. I read 2 Twisted Crowns and 1 Dark Window. This one comes first, and then 2 Twisted Crowns comes after. I liked 1 Dark Window a lot. The second one really lost me because it started following different characters. I was like, not really that invested, but the first one I liked. Had a cool magic system and with enemies to lovers, so I was following the romance a lot. I read Powerless and I loved it so much. This was one of my favorite reads this year. It was just so good. It was so good. The enemies to lovers banter is probably the #1 thing I would say to anyone to try and get them to read it. Is it just had such good chemistry between the MCs, and I was having the time of my life reading it. Truly, I felt like I was obsessed with them. I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I don't even know if I would read this one again, if I recommend it to myself again. Like, I have no idea. This is like a murder mystery. I think it's adult. It is super complex. Like, just will scramble your mind, maybe. It definitely did it to mine. I was continuing continuously shocked, especially towards the end. The information that was being not thrown at me, like it was well written, I feel like, but like it was a lot. Sometimes I was really into it and sometimes I was bored. It just like kept going back and forth. The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, I thought this one was beautiful and it was a great fiction book. It wasn't one of my favorites and I don't know if I'd read it again. I might. I didn't have like as much of a enjoyment of it than I would have hoped to have. I read this comic book, Miles Morales, Straight Out of Brooklyn. It was okay. I'm not a big comic book person, so I don't really know how to judge how good it was because I don't really like comic books that much, I don't think, but the pictures were really nice. Blade of Secrets, this one really surprised me. Ended up being one of my favorite books of the year. It's a YA fantasy and it was so good. Found family, adventure, a little bit of romance. Actually, kind of a lot of it is good. The Predator, I like this one. This was kind of like a middle ground dark romance for me. Like I feel like I've definitely read some that I like way more than this, but this one was just like pretty good. Like it was like middle to a little bit above from what I've read. Like I liked it. I was interested throughout it. I read Haunting Adeline and it's still haunting me. I read Haunting Adeline and it wasn't my thing. That's really the only thing I have to say about it, is it wasn't my thing. Everyone said like how dark and like kind of crazy this book was, and they just were not kidding. They weren't kidding. It was entertaining though, very entertaining, but also a little bit disturbing. A Curse for True Love, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was just like a really solid end to the trilogy. I didn't like it as much as the second one, but I still like had a really good time reading it. I'm just so fond of these characters in this story. I just love this trilogy. Check and Mate, I love this book so much. One of my favorite books of the year. It is so good. I love these characters. I love this story. I definitely feel like I'm going to reread this one day. I had an amazing time reading this book. I could not recommend this one enough. Lastly, the book that I'm reading right now, I'm reading The Feeling of Falling in Love. It's really good so far and I'm excited to continue it. Those are all the books that I read in 2023. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you think of them, or comment your favorite book that you read this year. I'll put all of my socials in the description. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos and to like this video if you liked it, and I will see you in the next one.